Joining us now on the Megacast is a professor of political science at Oakland University, where he also serves as the director of their Center for Civic Engagement. Dave Dulio is back with us once again on the program today. Dave, thanks for being with us.
Hey, Tyler, good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you as well. Things started to slow down a tiny bit on the political realm, but certainly have taken a little bit of a push forward as we get toward the end of the year and begin a year of change in 2023. I want to talk about, to begin today, the impact of a pretty, on the surface, minor change in the U.S. Senate that could have major implications going into 2023, as U.S. Senator Kristen Sinema from Arizona undeclaring her party affiliation with the Democrats and now becoming an independent. How might that affect Democrats, particularly in the Senate, going into 2023, especially now with Republican control of the House of Representatives and those numbers in the Senate being still pretty close to where they were this year and in the past few years?
Yeah, I think it's going to have minimal to no effect. You've seen certainly Senator Sinema say that she's declaring herself an independent rather than a Democrat. But what does that mean in practice, right? And from all the signals that have been given from the senator herself that she's going to continue to sort of behave the way that she has legislatively. She's always been kind of a thorn in the side of the Democrats and Senator Schumer as the party leader there. So she's going to continue to do that, but she's not going to lose her committee assignments. She's not going to stop caucusing with the Democrats. They're still going to have 51 votes, and I think it's going to go on so almost as quote unquote normal, if you will, for how the Senate operates these days. It seems that it might be more of a political and campaign move than anything. And that's because there's been talk of at least a couple Democrats in Arizona wanting to challenge her in a primary. So if she's not a Democrat, she doesn't face a primary challenge. She would just be on the general election ballot as an independent. And that could really change the way the next the 2024 Senate election in Arizona plays out.
Yeah, it's certainly going to have an impact there if she continues on as an independent. We've seen in the past that there's been sort of that argument between, well, should we have another person joining in and that may be affiliated with one party or another as a third party? How could that affect the party that they've previously been affiliated with and potentially set them up for a case in this scenario, maybe where those votes are split between the Democrats and an independent incumbent like Sinema? All of a sudden, now you have another Republican senator coming in the state of Arizona. So definitely some interesting developments there in Arizona affecting U.S. politics in the future. At the state level, we've got news that came in late yesterday, from the Michigan Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission, filing a lawsuit against the state legislature for a little over $3 million to continue on with their work, which is interesting to the average citizen considering they finished their maps well over a year ago. So first, Dave, what are they still working on?
Beats me. I have no idea. They're meeting tomorrow, I think, as a commission. So maybe that will shed some light on it. But that's a lot of money for. I'm not sure what we're getting for it. I mean, I think the commission is going to have to defend itself and say this is what you're going to get for the $3.5 million. I mean, I think most of it goes to salaries and benefits for some of those associated with the commission. So I think it's a fair question to ask. Sort of what's the return on investment here?
Yeah, and part of the argument that's been made, and this is from an article from Sarah Rahal at the Detroit News earlier on this week, late yesterday. Beth LeBlanc from the Detroit News earlier on yesterday, is that this $3.17 million budget was in order to help them continue on dealing with some of the lawsuits that remain ongoing against the commission regarding their maps, but now they add a new lawsuit to that as well for over $3 million. Their work has been completed, so it does seem to be like there's more of a lack of maybe understanding of just how far this commission should be going in the work that they do, which I would think is to be expected considering this is the first time a commission like this has operated statewide.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, right? And the first time you do something, there's always bugs that need to be worked out, and maybe this is one of them where there's no sunset in the Constitution now for when the commission starts and ends its work, and maybe that's appropriate if there happen to be lawsuits that extend beyond a particular time, maybe they have to keep doing that. But I don't know of any that are still pending, and the maps are in use. Right? We've had an election with their maps. Um, I mean, I suppose somebody could file a lawsuit in the aftermath. I think there's actually been some discussion of that, or some threatening of that based on some results in terms of minority representation. But there's got to be a way to handle that where it's not we're going to fund you for the entire year, right? I mean, where the commissioners would be drawing a paycheck from the state uh, every week.
We're joined by Dave Dulio on today's edition of the Megacast, a professor of political science at Oakland University, where he also serves as the director of their Center for Civic Engagement, making big national news over the weekend and late last week was finally the return of Britney Griner to the United States after being released in a prisoner exchange between the United States and Russia. She had been over there detained on drug charges for several months in Russia, and in the end, the United States exchanging a Russian arms dealer who had been imprisoned here in exchange for Griner, who is now back on U.S. soil as of earlier on this week. Dave, just to dive into the politics that goes into these sorts of negotiations, because there's a lot of argument being made too about another American, a local here in Oakland County, Paul Whelan, who is still imprisoned in Russia, and negotiations for his return to the United States have not been quite as successful as they were in the case of Britney Griner. So on the political side, from your knowledge, what sort of how tight of a line are our politicians, our leaders towing as they're making these negotiations when an American is imprisoned overseas, especially when they believe that's an imprisonment that's not quite legitimate?
Sure. I think that's the $1 million question right now. And what were the negotiations? We'll probably never know. And I think the politics of it though it was tough for the Biden administration in terms of the weight maybe um, of both sides and what they got, right? I mean, and of course the United States is never going to want to leave a citizen, whomever that is, in foreign custody when they don't think that they're being treated fairly, or maybe if there's human rights violations, or if they're wrongly imprisoned. Uh, but you look at what the United States gave up, and you can kind of understand the questions that are asked, not the criticisms, but just the questions. Hey, did we trade away too much? This guy, the arms dealer, has certainly been trading in weapons that have gone on to be used to kill Americans. Um, what was the negotiation? Was it a demand from the Russians that it's a 1-for-1 swap and you pick, or was it only, hey, we'll give you back Britney Griner for this guy? No mention of Paul Whelan, a veteran, a Marine who has been in Russian custody for, I think, 4+ years. So I think it's fascinating to watch. I do think that the Whelan family has helped calm the waters a bit by coming out in support of the prisoner swap, and saying that they understand that the U.S. government's doing whatever it can to get their loved one back. I do think and maybe I just missed it. I don't think so, but it's interesting that Brittany Griner hasn't made a statement, hasn't come out publicly to talk in the wake of her release. I think a lot of folks are waiting for that to happen to see how that goes.
Yeah, certainly Griner, a public figure for her affiliation with the WNBA and her prolific college basketball career as well. And Paul Whelan, in this case, a much more independent citizen in that regard, uh, during his imprisonment and continues to be imprisoned in Russia at this time. Dave, just before we let you go, a few more minutes. An interesting poll came out this week from Epic MRA out of Lansing regarding our presidential politics, particularly here in the state of Michigan, looking into 2023, a big year on the presidential front as we approach 2024. And from both parties, really interesting to see that kind of the figureheads of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party over the last several years, not garnering a whole lot of interest for 2024 from the state of Michigan. This poll showing that 60% of Democrats in this poll said they would prefer somebody other than Joe Biden running for president in 2024. Similar numbers from the Republican Party and Donald Trump, where 47% of those polled on the Republican side would rather see somebody other than Trump. Just how big of a year is 2023, particularly for these two candidates, should they both decide to continue on pursuing the presidency going forward? Of course, Trump already declaring candidacy for 2024 and Joe Biden yet to announce any decision on whether or not he will run for reelection.
Yeah, I think it's a big year, right? I mean, they've clearly got a lot of work to do to bring folks around to their side and garner some additional support. I think it, it really ultimately depends on what the rest of the field looks like. And on the Republican side, we kind of see how that's going, right? With Ron DeSantis, clearly, I would say the top uh, non-Trump alternative at this point. Does Ron DeSantis continue on that trajectory? Does he decide to not get in the race? That would change things dramatically. And on the Democratic side, it's really, does anybody have the guts to challenge a sitting president? I think that's a long way to go. And if Joe Biden decides to run for reelection, I think it's his. And even the steps that were taken in the last month or so to restructure the Democrats' primary process helps him do that. And I think that it all signs point to a Biden run. But is there somebody in the Democratic Party that would stand up and say, "Hey, thanks for your service, Mr. President. Time to move on to somebody else"?
And also, something to consider should Joe Biden decide that he does not plan to run for a second term. Is it going to be Kamala Harris that steps up and says that she's going to then run for president? You have someone challenging the sitting vice president for the
Right.
nomination, or who else rises up? Plenty to be considering as we go into 2023. Dave, we are just about out of time. I want to thank you for joining us. And of course, wish you a happy end of the year and hopefully plenty of interesting conversations to come in 2023 at the Center for Civic Engagement.
You can count on it, Tyler. Thanks for having me.